Imagine this scenario. The one action you feel convinced will finally make a narcissist suffer might actually be exactly what they are waiting for. You might believe that blocking them, pleading with them, firing off one final emotional message, or trying desperately to prove your worth will give you the power you seek. But none of those things actually grant you the control you think they do. There is one specific response that completely alters the psychological equation between you and them. It does not involve plotting revenge. It does not involve trying to win an argument. And it certainly does not require you to say another word to them. By the time you finish listening to this, you will understand why this single, quiet shift dismantles the control they once held over your life. Most people operate under the misconception that the real battle with a narcissist is being played out through text messages, phone calls, social media activity, or dramatic face-to-face confrontations. That is not where the fight is happening. The real, underlying battle is occurring entirely inside your own nervous system. That is where the manipulation begins. That is where the confusion takes root. And crucially, that is also where your freedom begins. The biggest mistake people make is believing they must somehow force or convince the narcissist to finally understand and acknowledge the pain they have caused. They will not do it. This is not because they are physically incapable of hearing your words, but because true accountability would directly threaten the carefully constructed image they work so tirelessly to protect. If you have ever found yourself wondering why every single conversation leaves you feeling more confused than you were before, why every attempt at finding closure just ends up creating more painful questions, or why walking away feels significantly harder than staying, then this information is for you. Today, we are going to explore what actually happens when you stop participating in the game entirely. Many people are taught that blocking a narcissist is the ultimate act of reclaiming their power. While there are certainly situations where blocking is an absolute necessity for your personal safety, for your healing, or for putting an end to ongoing abuse, it is vital to understand that the action of hitting the block button by itself is not what creates your power. The deeper, more important question is whether the act of blocking reflects a genuine state of emotional detachment, or whether it is simply another move in a long, drawn-out emotional struggle that still revolves entirely around the narcissist. If you block them but spend the rest of your day wondering if they noticed, checking to see if they are trying to reach you through other means, or hoping that they are finally feeling regret for their behavior, then your emotional energy is still deeply tethered to them. The physical distance might exist, but the psychological connection remains completely intact. This is the primary reason why simply pressing a button rarely delivers the sense of peace that so many people expect. Your mind continues to replay past conversations, it keeps imagining future encounters, and it stays on a constant search for validation that may never actually arrive. The narcissistic relationship was originally built on keeping your attention narrowly focused on their reactions, and that destructive pattern can easily continue even after you have officially cut off communication. In many cases, the real challenge you face is not actually ending the physical contact, but ending the internal, emotional dependence on their approval, their explanations, or their acknowledgement. The most psychologically powerful shift happens when your decisions are no longer influenced by what the narcissist might think or how they might react. Whether you decide to block them or whether you choose to leave the digital door technically open becomes far less important than reaching that crucial place where their actions no longer dictate your emotional state. When you reach this point, your attention begins to return naturally to your own life, your own goals, and your own healing journey. That internal shift changes the entire dynamic because your sense of stability is no longer contingent upon their response, their silence, or their various attempts to regain your attention. When people have been deeply hurt by a narcissist, the natural human instinct is to explain their pain, to plead for a shred of understanding, or to ask for one final conversation that will hopefully make everything clear. It feels like a reasonable approach because in healthy, functional relationships, things often do improve through honest, open communication. But the problem is that narcissistic dynamics operate on a completely different set of rules. Every single attempt you make to beg, to justify your side, or to seek some kind of closure often communicates exactly what the narcissist values more than your words. It tells them that they still occupy a central, vital place in your emotional world. Your continued pursuit provides them with the reassurance they need that they still have the power to influence your thoughts, your feelings, and your important decisions. This is the exact reason why emotional appeals so often end in nothing but frustration. Instead of responding with the empathy you are looking for, a narcissist will almost always dismiss your feelings, pivot to changing the subject, blame you for the entirety of the conflict, or offer just a small, calculated amount of kindness to keep you emotionally invested in them. The conversation stops being about resolving the actual issue and instead becomes another opportunity for them to maintain control over the emotional dynamic. You leave the interaction feeling completely unheard and invalidated, while they leave the interaction knowing that they still have total access to your attention. Begging for closure also creates a deeply unhealthy imbalance. Without ever intending to do so, you begin to place your precious self-worth in the hands of someone who has repeatedly shown little to no interest in protecting it. The more you ask them to validate your experience, the more power you unknowingly give them to define your reality for you. This keeps you trapped in a painful cycle where every unanswered message, every delayed reply, or every cold, distant response feels deeply and painfully personal. Real healing begins when you finally stop expecting the person who created the emotional wound to be the same person who heals it. Closure is not something they grant you through a perfect, movie-style conversation. It is something you gradually build yourself by accepting the reality of the situation, by trusting your own experience, and by firmly refusing to chase validation from someone who has consistently used it as a tool for maintaining influence over you. One of the most important distinctions you need to learn is the difference between genuine emotional detachment and a simple emotional reaction. On the surface, two people might appear to be doing the exact same thing. Both of them stop responding to messages. Both of them avoid unnecessary arguments. And both of them create physical distance. Yet, internally, they are in completely different psychological states. One person is silently waiting for the narcissist to finally notice, to apologize, or to come crawling back to them. The other person has genuinely shifted their focus away from the narcissist and toward the process of rebuilding their own life. The behavior may look identical to an outside observer, but the underlying emotional reality is vastly different. Narcissistic relationships often condition people to react rather than to reflect. Every piece of criticism, every confusing mixed signal, and every rare, unexpected moment of affection trains your nervous system to stay on high alert. You begin monitoring their moods, you start anticipating their next move, and you find yourself adjusting your own behavior in hopes of preventing conflict or earning their approval. Over time, this constant state of emotional vigilance becomes incredibly exhausting. Yet, it also becomes a familiar way of existing. Even after the relationship has officially ended, your mind may continue reacting as though the narcissist is still there, directing your emotional world. Emotional detachment is the key to interrupting this pattern. It does not mean becoming cold, uncaring, or emotionally numb. It simply means recognizing that your inner peace no longer depends on their opinions, their validation, or their unpredictable behavior. Instead of asking yourself what they are thinking, you begin asking yourself what you actually need. Instead of spending your precious energy analyzing every single message or every instance of silence, you invest that mental energy into your own recovery, your other healthy relationships, and your personal growth. This shift is incredibly powerful because it effectively removes the narcissist from the center of your psychological landscape. They may continue using all the familiar tactics they have always used to provoke guilt, to spark curiosity, or to stir up hope. But those tactics lose almost all of their influence when your emotional stability is no longer connected to their actions. Your attention becomes your own again. And with that reclamation of your attention comes the true freedom to make decisions based on your own values, rather than as a reaction to someone else. Silence has a very different, more profound meaning in a narcissistic relationship than it does in a healthy one. When you choose to silence your own need to explain or seek validation, you are not just walking away. You are reclaiming the narrative of your life. Most people operate under the assumption that if they stop reaching out, the other person will eventually sit back, reflect on what happened, recognize the loss, and become genuinely curious about where things went wrong. That expectation is a natural result of having lived in relationships built on empathy, shared trust, and mutual concern. A narcissist, however, operates differently. They often interpret silence through the lens of control, social status, and emotional influence, rather than through the lens of genuine connection. Their first concern is rarely a thoughtful reflection on how you are feeling. Instead, their primary focus is usually on what this silence means for their ability to maintain access to your attention. This is exactly why silence can produce reactions that feel completely unexpected. Some narcissists might immediately attempt to re-establish contact with a sudden surge of affection, insincere apologies, or nostalgic messages designed to pull you back in. Others might choose to act entirely indifferent, quickly redirecting their focus towards someone else, or they may even try to provoke a direct response from you through indirect or manipulative means. It is important to realize that these reactions are not necessarily signs of deep reflection or genuine personal growth. More often than not, they are simply calculated attempts to figure out whether the usual emotional dynamic can still be restored. The biggest mistake many people make is interpreting any response from the narcissist as definitive proof that they have finally changed or that they have suddenly realized your true value. In reality, your silence simply disrupts the predictable pattern they had grown accustomed to. When someone who was once consistently available suddenly becomes emotionally unavailable, the familiar script they were using no longer produces the same results. That uncertainty can certainly motivate them to try new behaviors. However, you should never confuse those new, reactive behaviors with a lasting, internal transformation. Your silence is at its most powerful when it is not being used as a strategic tool to make the narcissist react. If your silence becomes just another way of secretly waiting and hoping for them to chase you, then your emotional focus is still entirely centered on their behavior. Genuine silence reflects a firm, internal decision to stop participating in unhealthy, draining cycles. Whether the narcissist notices, responds to, ignores, or attempts to reach out to you becomes secondary, because your emotional direction is no longer being determined by their interpretation of your absence. If this discussion is helping you identify and understand patterns you have long struggled to explain, please take a moment to subscribe and leave a comment below with the word freedom. It tells me that you are choosing clarity over confusion and that you are ready to invest in your own emotional well-being. Let us continue. One of the greatest misunderstandings that occurs after leaving a narcissistic relationship is the belief that your recovery depends on figuring out exactly what the narcissist is doing, what they are thinking, or how they are feeling. It is so easy to become completely consumed by questions such as, have they moved on? Do they miss me? Or will they ever eventually regret what happened? These questions may seem harmless or natural, but they quietly keep your attention locked onto the very person you are trying to escape. Your mind remains occupied by their choices instead of focusing on your own growth, which allows the emotional bond to continue to thrive long after the relationship has effectively ended. Attention is one of the most valuable psychological resources you possess. Wherever you choose to direct that attention, your emotions, your energy, and your mental focus will naturally follow. Narcissistic relationships often condition you to prioritize the other person's needs, moods, and reactions above your own. You become highly skilled at monitoring their emotional state while slowly losing touch with your own. Even after the relationship ends, this habit can persist, making it very difficult to reconnect with your own identity outside of the context of that relationship. Claiming your attention means intentionally shifting your focus back to yourself. Instead of tracking whether they viewed your social media story or wondering if they are talking about you behind your back, you begin asking yourself much healthier questions. What activities actually bring you genuine peace? Which of your friendships deserve more of your time and energy? What personal goals have been neglected while you were emotionally consumed by the relationship? These questions redirect your energy toward rebuilding your life rather than revisiting the painful past. The truly remarkable effect of this shift is that your emotional world becomes significantly less reactive and much more intentional. You stop measuring your progress by the narcissist's behavior and start measuring it by your own increasing sense of calm, confidence, and self-respect. As your attention returns to your personal values, your health, and your future, the narcissist gradually loses the central role they once occupied in your mind. This creates the necessary space for a life that is no longer defined by their presence or their absence. One of the most significant shifts you can make after leaving a narcissistic relationship is becoming emotionally unpredictable. This does not mean you should play games. Instead, it means you stop responding according to the specific patterns that once kept you trapped. Narcissistic dynamics often rely heavily on your predictability. Over time, the narcissist learns exactly what will make you explain yourself, what will force you to defend your intentions, what will make you forgive too quickly, or what will cause you to chase after reassurance. They begin to anticipate your reactions, and they use that knowledge to maintain influence over you. The relationship becomes less about a genuine, healthy connection and more about managing your emotional responses. When you always react in those familiar, ingrained ways, the cycle remains perfectly intact. If criticism always leads you to seek their approval, or if silence always pushes you to reach out to them first, the narcissist can rely on those patterns. They do not need to know exactly what you are thinking, because they already know how you are likely to respond. That predictability gives them a sense of control, even if you are no longer together. Becoming emotionally unpredictable does not mean acting impulsively, withholding affection just to be manipulative, or trying to make the narcissist jealous. It means your decisions are no longer driven by fear, guilt, or the desperate need for their validation. Sometimes, that might look like not replying to a message immediately. Other times, it may mean declining to explain yourself, refusing to engage in circular arguments, or calmly maintaining your boundaries without feeling the need to defend them. Your actions become guided by your own values rather than by their expectations. This change can feel unfamiliar at first because you are no longer operating from a place of survival mode. Instead of constantly scanning for signs of conflict or trying to prevent the next emotional upheaval, you begin responding with intention rather than mere reflex. The narcissist may find this confusing, as the old script you used to follow no longer works for them. But the true value of this shift is not found in how they react to you. It lies in the fact that your emotional life is no longer organized around anticipating or managing someone else's behavior, which allows you to rediscover a sense of stability that comes from within rather than from external approval. When a narcissist no longer receives emotional fuel, the dynamic of the relationship begins to change in ways that are often misunderstood. Emotional fuel refers to the attention, the admiration, the conflict, the reassurance, the fear, or the general emotional intensity that keeps you psychologically engaged with them. It does not matter whether the attention you give them is positive or negative. An argument, a heartfelt apology, repeated explanations, or desperate attempts to be understood can all reinforce the connection because they confirm that the narcissist still occupies a powerful place in your emotional world. When that steady stream of emotional engagement begins to disappear, the narcissist may respond in different ways. Some may suddenly become unusually charming, apologetic, or affectionate. Others may criticize you more intensely, try to provoke your jealousy, spread rumors, or attempt to create situations that draw you back into conflict. These behaviors can appear contradictory, but they often serve the exact same purpose. They are testing whether they can still influence your emotions and regain the familiar dynamic that once existed. It is vital not to interpret these reactions as evidence of deep, personal change or lasting remorse. Temporary kindness after losing influence is not the same thing as genuine accountability. Real change requires consistent self-awareness, empathy, and a willingness to accept responsibility over a long period, not simply a shift in tactics when access to your attention becomes limited. The most meaningful transformation actually occurs within you. As you stop providing emotional fuel, your mind becomes less occupied with anticipating the narcissist's next move. You begin sleeping better, thinking more clearly, and making decisions based on your own priorities instead of living in a state of constant emotional survival. The relationship gradually loses its psychological grip because your attention is no longer feeding the cycle. The greatest mistake people make after a narcissistic relationship is believing the final victory comes from changing the narcissist. It does not. It comes from changing the relationship you have with yourself. The moment you stop chasing explanations, stop measuring your self-worth by their attention, and stop waiting for them to become the person you hoped they would be, you begin taking back the one thing they never should have controlled in the first place, which is your peace. Whether you choose to block them, maintain strict boundaries, or simply refuse to engage is a personal decision that should be based on your specific circumstances. What truly matters is the reason behind that decision. If it comes from a place of fear or from lingering anger, keep working on your inner strength. Focus on yourself, and you will eventually find the freedom you deserve.